their arguments against it. I'm just not sure on what can be covered. It is my opinion that more specific standards may allow for more academic freedom within the science classroom. If teachers were provided with the information on students' prior knowledge, because many of them have understandings of some of the content that was covered here today, maybe not a firm grasp, but they have some knowledge of some of the arguments. Teachers could then, if they had this information, they could explain to students why, by the current definition of science, this information maybe is not considered admissible. And students would benefit from understanding also the dynamics of the science community. But they would be still provided with a variety of information that would allow them to make an informed decision to critically analyze this content.
Do you believe the explanations about the origin of life and biological origins impact religion?
Yes. Explanations of origins impact the belief systems of students. And I base that on what they have shared with me. Every child comes into my classroom with prior knowledge. I was trained as a teacher to access that prior knowledge when all new content was introduced. This would allow me to identify misconceptions or build on their knowledge. With evolution, it was difficult for me to access their prior knowledge because then I would have to identify many things they said as misconceptions.
You say in your written remarks that with evolution, when I use naturalism to define science, I would identify children's belief systems as a possible misconception.
I believe in my mind that's what I would have to perceive them as.
And so you believe this could have an impact on your students' beliefs?
Yes.
So what are you saying there? You're saying there that the evolutionary explanation is a naturalistic one. And if that's the only explanation that's permitted, then you're effectively skewing belief in that direction.
Yes.
Would you say that the naturalistic explanation supports non-theistic beliefs while the non-naturalistic or the disagreement with that naturalistic belief supports theistic beliefs?
That seems to be the concern that has been expressed to me by many parents.
And the parents' concern is that you are promoting a curriculum that supports only one kind of religious belief.
Right. At this point, though, I would not advocate for intelligent design or creationism to be brought into the science classroom. However, I do believe that students are entitled to hear the research, to analyze the research that contradicts, and to teach the controversy, whether believed by us as science teachers or not. It is there. And I believe they should be able to research it and discern for themselves.
Do you think teachers are, I believe Roger DeHart read a reference from the National Science Teachers Association, which would encourage teachers to not do anything that would diminish or weaken evolutionary theory. Do you believe that policy is implemented in Kansas public schools? And what do you think the effect of that policy is?
I have read that policy. I believe it does impact the classroom. As a teacher, I don't want to be a rule breaker. and that's why coming here today was a very difficult decision.
Further, could you comment on whether teachers are actually encouraged by that kind of system to suppress evidence that might weaken the theory of evolution?
I do not believe it is blatant among educators. However, we are put in a situation where it is oftentimes inevitable. I have had students engage me in discussion over controversy surrounding evidence for evolution that is presented in our textbooks. For instance, the peppered moth photographs that have been found to be inaccurate. I allow students to share their thoughts. However, they will often then question, well, why is it in the book? Especially when we just adopted it 3 years ago. Or just last year, as we read under the boldface heading, a new species can form when a group of individuals remains separated from the rest of its species long enough to evolve different traits. The evidence for this tells of a squirrel population that became isolated in a small side of the Grand Canyon in Arizona. They read that this group evolved 2 types of squirrels, one with a black belly, one with a white. I think probably a lot of people are familiar with this, but I'll tell the story anyways. Then they, just below that, they read this statement. Scientists are not sure whether the squirrels have become different enough to be considered a separate species. And immediately, a student inquired, Mrs. Gonzalez, doesn't the book also say that if species are the same, aren't they able to mate to produce fertile offspring? So why don't those scientists just mate the 2 squirrels and see what happens? Now, keep in mind, I do teach middle school, so this was not an uncommon theme with... this was a well-analyzed statement, however, right up there on Maslow's hierarchy. But I was unsure how to field that question other than to say, well, yeah, maybe they should do that. And let's say that a student does not bring up the controversy surrounding the peppered moths in England, and therefore I don't, because as a science teacher, I have been encouraged not to do anything to weaken or diminish evolution by the National Science Teachers Association. What do you suppose the child will think when he later finds out this discrepancy surrounding this evidence? To me, it would do more harm to teaching of evolution as a unifying theory of science than to the teaching of science. The student will begin to question why they were lied to about this issue, or at least they will perceive deception. Whether it's there or not, that is their perception. And they'll wonder what else is untrue. There may be scientists that could explain this away, but as an educator, how are we to deal with these controversies being brought up in our classrooms? We rely on scientists to provide us with unbiased content for our classrooms. That's why we rely on our textbooks. This is our source of information and knowledge that we give to our students.
Would you comment on how your Christian faith played a role in your views of evolutionary theory? And has it dictated your conclusions or caused you to critically analyze it from a scientific standpoint?
I believe the change in my faith from secular humanism to Christianity impacts my understanding of science in regards to my ability to respect information presented to me by people that hold similar as well as different worldviews. I think in many ways it has opened my mind to the vast amount of knowledge and information that I have yet to learn. My faith does play an integral part in who and how I view my students and the respect I give them, but as a professional in a public school, my job is not to present content from only my worldview. This would hamper academic freedom and not foster my role as an objective educator. My job is not to change their thinking. It is to encourage them to think and seek out knowledge from a variety of resources and to make informed decisions.
How do you think the Minority Report proposed changes would impact the typical high school, middle school science classroom?
I think as a teacher, the more information I am provided with on the prior knowledge that students may have, as well as the content in the scientific community, would help me to develop lessons, would help me address issues that will be brought up within my class, and will not leave me with my mouth open when a student comes up with something that they have read in a journal that I was not familiar with.
Could you go into a bit more detail, Jill, about how the Minority Report and the standards would impact the classroom?
It is my opinion that the standards would lead to an environment that would allow for greater academic freedom. Though I have received emails by science teachers in my own school and within the state in support of the proposed changes, I have also been encouraged by others to make sure I will not regret anything I say. So I have read some of the opposition's opinions and found two common themes that I would like to address. One, we should only teach what scientists think about scientific topics. The argument is that no scientists support anything counter to evolution. I would say that by today's testimony, this just is not the case. I am more concerned that perhaps censorship has been applied to these scientists because they hold views that are counter to the secular humanist worldview. And second, I'm sorry, but I'm just imagining my cross here. I mean, cross evaluation. Okay. All right, two. My second thing is that if we allow discussion into the criticisms of evolution, or if we change the definition of science to not allow only natural causes, that this could somehow lead to the educator being forced to acknowledge an array of other viewpoints within the classroom. Okay? I believe one example was, what if a student was interested in the occult? Okay. The teacher would be forced to acknowledge it as somehow valid. My opinion is that I already allow for free exchange of ideas and respect the views of my students when I cover a wide variety of topics. I allow for academic freedom on a variety of subjects, so why not evolution? So if a student showed interest into some aspect of the occult that was dealing with an area of what they perceived science to be, I would encourage them to apply the steps of the scientific method and research this interest. It is at that point, looking at the data, whether they could gather data or not, that the students, well, they would have to gather data, but that the students would need to draw their own conclusions. I take issue with invalidating anyone's thoughts because they may be derived from a worldview counter to mine. This concerns me, and that is why, with much contemplation, I chose to speak today. This has not been exactly a career move to speak of, when so many have chosen to boycott. But I am here not to advance my own agenda, but to promote greater academic freedom for our children.
Jill, during your testimony, you're reading from a document, and I believe this is correct. This is a document. I think I sent you a list of questions that I wanted you to address, which was a much longer list than what you addressed, and we talked about it, and decided that what you should do is just put together your own list of questions, answer those questions, and that would be your talk. Is that essentially what?
That's right. So am I done?
So the reason why we have this, everything, the questions and the answers are purely out of your pen. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So you would agree with me that I didn't provide any of the questions or the answers here?
No.
Okay.
You gave me some ideas on the questions, but not the answers. You made me
Okay.
toil over this.
Let me, one thing, if you could, you've read the Minority Report.
Yes, I have. And the majority report.
And have you, and have administrators at your school read them, or have you discussed this with the administrators of your school before you came, correct?
Yes, I followed protocol and spoke with my principal, and I spoke with my superintendent. They were in support. They were in support of me being here today.
And did you discuss this with other teachers?
I did.
And what kind of feedback did you get?
Mostly positive among the area and field which I teach. I would say out of the 6 teachers within my school, 5 agreed with me that I spoke with. And of course, when I tried to tell them, well, then you come up here and do this, they declined. And then I also have gotten emails from teachers around Kansas in different communities as well.
And those
support.
emails, have they been supportive?
Some have been supportive, and some not. But this is my opinion. And it's not based, actually, it's based on my observations of my students and what their parents have expressed to me as concerns. And as a public educator, my duty is not to serve the science community other than to provide them with good students that are able to critically analyze. My job is to serve students and their parents. I also believe that's the job of our school board as well.
Would you,
sorry.
is it fair to say that the current science teacher in the biology classroom does not really know where the boundaries are in terms of criticizing evolution? Is that a fair statement?
I can speak to myself.
That's
I do not.
You don't know where your boundaries are. Other than you can't go too far in terms of weakening the theory.
Right.
Right. So, and that, is there a tension there between your conscience, on the one hand, information in your head, and these undefinable boundaries, and does that affect your students and the way you deal with your students, and will the Minority Report in any way alleviate that? Would it provide maybe a more
Yes.
comfortable boundaries?
Right. I believe it will provide teachers, whether they agree or disagree, but with the information and content that students may be coming into their classrooms with, some of the arguments that the students know. I mean, if I have an 8th grade student that can voice to me 5 things that she has found wrong with some of the information here in the book, and I don't know how to respond other than to do my own research, I think it would be beneficial to provide this resource, which the standards are a resource for our educators.
Thank you so much for coming.
Mr. Irgangarai.
I have no questions.
Oh, you're kidding me. Oh,
I have no questions.
okay. You're immersed.
Thank you. Please. Not appropriate.
Just again want to say thank you so much for coming. As a teacher for many years, I do understand exactly where you're coming from. We need to look at our students and find out what they need and what their needs are, what their parents expect of us, and then as a professional educator, we need to do our job. And I applaud that you're trying to meet their needs. It is difficult to understand what a teacher's limitations will be in addressing this issue. emails and things I've gotten, probably very similar to the ones you have, are always saying, are you going to teach this? And I say, well, no, you don't teach it exactly. And so I don't think people that are not in the education teaching field in a public classroom understand how you don't actually teach controversial subjects. You allow for the discussion, and I think that's where you're coming from. And I've heard some very excellent public school teachers here today try to address that we want to address the controversy, not teach one or the other as facts. It's never good science to teach anything as a fact that has not been proven.
I think you did a great job, and someone used the phrase critical mass of data coming forth that refutes Darwinian evolution, and eventually that will catch up with the evolutionists. And you, dear wonderful teacher, will be on the leading edge.
Thank you.
You'll be great. You'll do fine.
I'm sorry, I do have some questions.
Okay.
Where were you teaching prior to being employed at Rose Hill?
I was teaching at Alcott Academy, which is in Wichita Public Schools.
Right. How many years have you been teaching the controversy in your classroom now?
I'd say 7.
Any complaints?
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't teach the controversy. No.
Okay. How would you describe it?
Can you ask me that again? Have I been teaching evolution in the classroom? 7 years. But I don't teach the controversies currently because the standards don't allow for the controversy. So I would not do that. I teach to the standards.
Okay. Did I misunderstand when you said you were in an alternative school?
Yes.
And it wasn't that you were teaching the controversy, it was that they were bringing up the controversy. Is that a correct statement?
Right.
Oh,
right.
okay.
Right.
And you were trying to answer some of their concerns as they were presenting them as questions?
At that point, I was not familiar with the controversies. I did not see any, I did not believe there was any controversy.
Okay.
I drew the conclusion that whether I believe there's a controversy or not, my students believe there's a controversy. They bring the controversies up. And I believe the standards should address their needs. And these are questions that they have, that they field, and they ask me, and I'm unsure as to the controversies as how to address them because they are not within the standards.
Okay.
Okay.
If some form of the minority report were incorporated in the science curriculum standards, how would it be of value? Would it be of value to you as a teacher and to the students? And you spoke briefly about that, but more in detail, how would it be of value to teachers and to the student?
The changes in the minority report. I believe it would provide us with more information on the controversies that students are aware of and that parents are aware of, to aspects of evolution.
How would you categorize, are there a number of teachers like you around the state that I guess the best way is to describe it might be unsure? Is that a fair description of what you're telling us? Unsure how to proceed? What your limitations are? Would you say there are a fair number of teachers? Is that an accurate description of what you're telling us?
I can speak for myself, and it seems when I discuss it with other educators, well, yes, I would say educators that I have spoke to, they see the debate among our students. Do you understand what I'm saying? They may not see the controversies, but they see that there is debate within the classroom when this topic occurs, whether they agree with the issues or not that are coming up. The students do come in with a certain amount of knowledge on this.
Is there a number of teachers that would like assistance to more accurately, that they would be more accurately able to know where their limitations are and how they could proceed and what to do?
I believe if there were more teachers that agreed with it, they'd be here speaking with me today. But I do believe there are quite a few that, and then, well, actually, I believe that maybe people just aren't aware. The way that this has been presented is that we are trying, or the Minority Report is trying to incorporate intelligent design. And I don't see that in these standards changes. If I did, I don't know if I could support creation being brought in either.
Thank you very much for your time, Ms. Gonzalez-Bravo.
Thank you.
I'd like to present, as our last witness for the day, John Milam. John is a theoretical physicist?
Theoretical chemist.
Theoretical chemist, okay. And I'm not really sure I can explain what he's doing now, so I'll let him tell you about that.
All right. My background is in chemistry and physics. I have a double degree there from the University of Arizona, and I have a PhD in computational chemistry or quantum chemistry, depending on how you want to call it. Basically, that's borderline between chemistry and physics. Involves lots of mathematics and quantum mechanics. And I'm currently employed developing computational chemistry software for use in science. Anyways, I'm not a biologist, but I think my different background will bring some insights that other speakers may not have presented. I'm also interested in looking at the historical origins of science. That's been a hobby of mine. I'm also a scientist to layman, trying to help ordinary people understand what's happening in science. Charles Boyle, the founder of modern chemistry, was a scientist layman, and I kind of take him as a role model. Anyway, so why am I here to testify? Do you have my PowerPoint?
Yes. To lead you into that, I asked Dr. Milam to testify with respect to two issues. The first is, and they're both related. The first is with respect to the proposed change in the definition of science, which we've all heard and is on the screen. The second change, and you're familiar with this change, and I would assume everybody in the audience is familiar with it by now. The second change is with respect to the description of scientific knowledge on page 22. Somebody's been wanting me to give page descriptions. And the proposed change here is the Majority Report would define scientific knowledge as knowledge describing and explain knowledge that describes and explains the physical world in terms of matter, energy, and forces, whereas the Minority Report would revise that to say scientific knowledge describes and explains the natural world. So I'd appreciate your commenting on those two important changes, and I believe you have a PowerPoint to go into that.
All right. Anyway, so my primary topic is what is science, and particularly science versus methodological naturalism. Here's from draft 2 of the science standards, which we just saw, which talks about seeking natural explanations of the universe, or seeking natural explanations for what we observe in the world around us. I think I skipped one. Anyway, so what I'm here to discuss is that is methodological naturalism and not science, and therefore that should not be included in in the Kansas State science standards. So the question is, what is science? We need to have an understanding of that. Science in the broadest sense is simply investigation of the natural world, but when we talk about science today, we're really talking not about science generically, but modern science. Modern science which developed in 16th and 17th century Europe, and in particular, modern science is distinguished from ancient and medieval science by an emphasis on testing, experiment, falsification. It uses the scientific method. It uses Occam's razor, that is the principle of simplicity. And of course, there's other things. I just listed a few key elements here. So again, that philosophy of science developed in the 16th and 17th century Europe. Methodological naturalism as a philosophy arose in the mid-18th century. So it is something distinct from science, developing after science was well established. I want to take a little time to explain the birth of modern science, because what's astonishing is that scientists are not taught about science. Scientists are taught about what science do, how to run experiments, but scientists traditionally are not told about what science is. We're taught about the discoveries of science, but little about the philosophy or origins of science. And the way I discovered this was after 5 years of undergraduate, 5 years of graduate school, and 3.5 years of postdoctoral work. I didn't know about how science began until a philosopher actually questioned me about that subject, and so I've had to learn it on my own. I did not learn any of this even at the highest levels of academia. So anyways, modern science really developed in the 16th and 17th century, but it has roots in the scholastic period, that's 11th to 15th century. For example, Roger Bacon and Albert Magnus in the 13th century, they're the ones that first emphasized the experimental method. Durandus and William Vaughan are the ones that popularized Occam's razor. Again, this was in the context of Christian philosophy at the time. We have Francis Bacon and Galileo in the 17th century. They're the ones that really pioneered the scientific method. Then finally, of course, we have the big names, Johannes Kepler, Isaac Newton, Charles Boyle, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These are the people that took this newly developed scientific method and applied it and actually demonstrated its effectiveness. So a couple conclusory statements. One is almost every branch of modern science can be traced back to this time period. But I think there's another point relevant to here is that there's nothing inherent in the scientific enterprise that requires restricting it to natural causes or natural explanations only. Science is about what is testable, not necessarily what is naturalistic. And kind of as supporting evidence for that, all the figures who founded and developed modern science, such as the people I've just mentioned, none of them held to this idea of methodological naturalism. As I mentioned, methodological naturalism came about...
Sir, can you hang on just a second? There's an issue that needs to be addressed because I believe there's been a misrepresentation.
Okay.
Draft 2 does not deal with, does not mention methodological naturalism.
Yes, I would like to have that quote back up.
Let's see, how do I go back on this one? I guess let's see. This one?
I object to this completely. I completely and totally object to this. The rules provide for no interruption during presentations. This can be handled on cross-examination.
Okay.
This is a fraud.
I downloaded this off the official Kansas website 2 days ago. I'm sorry if maybe I grabbed the wrong file.
Excuse me, sir. That is incorrect and should not be made out to the public as lower standard.
Mr. Irgonagrai, Mr. Calvert, we're trying to get this settled here. At this point in time,
right.
I don't see any reference to methodological naturalism in the actual draft.
I may have downloaded the wrong file, but I did go to the official Kansas website and download this cut and paste. So maybe this is some commentary that accidentally got in there. I'm willing to retract everything after that first statement. The part about seeking natural explanations, I believe everyone agrees is in draft 2.
That is a correct statement. Yes. I just wanted to comment about the methodological naturalism because it is not found in draft 2.
Right.
The specific words.
And any reference to it being in the standards should be struck from the record as being an inaccurate statement.
All right. Again, methodological naturalism came about in the 18th century. Immanuel Kant was one of the major developers of this idea. Just as for history, he came up with what's called the nebula hypothesis, where galaxies and solar system form from a collapsing nebula, and as on the basis of his success in science, he then proposed a set of philosophical axioms, such as knowledge is limited to the five senses, cause not can be proved from effects, miracles are illusory, and several others. And he had an unstated premise that at no point can God or any other supernatural force ever be objectively detectable, and hence that was the basis of that philosophy. And so we do see a religious, not a purely secular idea coming out of Kant's philosophy. So he made a scientific theory, he made some philosophy. Now he came back and proposed three scientific claims. One is that the universe is an infinite static universe model. That is, the universe has no beginning, no ending, and it has no edge or limit. He had the Copernican principle. That is, there is no design in the universe, and then natural processes alone explain life. So he was, since a prototype of evolution. Darwin would obviously come in on that issue later. And these three scientific claims buttressed his philosophy and have undergirded science for the last 200 years. So again, methodological naturalism, as I'm presenting it here, is not a strictly scientific belief, but is undergirded on agnostic or deistic belief system. Now let's also look at some history. Now the question is, why are these three pillars important for us to understand? Because in Kant's infinite static universe, the universe is uncreated, very explicitly no beginning or no ending. There's infinite time for natural processes and infinite extent. So habitable life-sustaining planets are guaranteed. In an infinite universe, there's infinite chance, which guarantees a naturalistic solution to life's origins. And hence, as long as the scientific claim is true, we can always exclude anything other than naturalism at the outset in scientific investigation. Now, of course, we no longer believe in an infinite static universe. Einstein developed general relativity that showed the universe was expanding. But it's very interesting that Einstein undercut his own work by introducing a fudge factor to bring back an infinite static universe. In other words, rather than embracing his own discovery, he tried to get around it. The term Big Bang was actually created as a term of derision because, and the reason I'm pointing all this out is that many scientists actually initially opposed Big Bang cosmology because it undercut an infinite static universe. It undercut a purely methodological naturalist universe. Let's see, so again, we see methodological, this idea hindering science, as in the example of Albert Einstein, but also discouraging looking for problems with that prevailing idea of the infinite static universe. There's a number of arguments against that model, but largely they were dismissed. This last one in thermodynamics is one that's particularly interesting because a simple causal level proof of using thermodynamics should have showed an infinite static universe was impossible. Okay. All right. A simple college level proof using thermodynamics could have demonstrated an infinite static universe was impossible. However, curiously, that was not discovered until long after the infinite static universe model was gone. And in other words, no one was encouraged to challenge that view of the universe. And I'm just using that as an example of how this idea of naturalism and that science can get caught into ideas that it no longer allows, no longer encourages challenging or testing. This is an interesting quote. This is from Robert Jastrow. He's actually an agnostic, but he makes an interesting point about all the things I've just been saying, that that as an agnostic, he's noting a very peculiar reaction among his astronomical colleagues, and the question is why. The response of a scientific mind, supposedly a very objective mind, when evidence uncovered to science leads to conflict with the articles of faith in our profession. In other words, that the scientists had so accepted a certain view of the universe that they no longer challenged it and became really emotionally upset when that view was challenged by the actual evidence. This is a similar one for scientists who live by faith in the power of reason alone. The story ends like a bad dream. Again, he's noting an emotional reaction against this particular idea that the universe has a beginning, and hence that the universe is not infinite. Okay, so again, methodological naturalism in part is based on a pillar which is now known to be false. The Big Bang cosmology has implications for biology because it takes away the infinite chance argument used by strict natural evolution. Note I'm saying strict natural evolution as opposed to evolution in the generic sense. Again, methodological naturalism initially opposed and hindered the development of Big Bang cosmology. Pillar number 2, undesigned universe. The Copernican principle, or the principle of mediocrity, says that we cannot be special in any way. There cannot be anything special about our sun, our planet, or anything. If there's life here, there must be life elsewhere in the universe. This was popularized in the 1960s by people like Frank Drake and Carl Sagan, and of course the popular search for extraterrestrial intelligence. So initially they assumed that only 2 things had to be right for there to be habitability, and that had to have the right star and the planet the right distance from the star. Today there's a growing body of evidence that we need hundreds of things to be right for a planet to be able to sustain advanced life. There's a growing movement towards what's called the rare Earth hypothesis, which argues that habitable planets are rare at best. And again, part of the reason for emphasizing astronomy, even though a lot of the issue is biology, is that a lot of the early ideas was as long as you have so many places where life could start, then we can explain life here as just one of those random accidents. But the problem is we're now taking away both infinite time and a large number of places where life could potentially start. Let's see. In terms of naturalistic evolution, I'm not going to deal with evolution itself. Other people will be dealing with that. Since I'm not a biologist, I'm going to stick with just the Urey-Miller experiment, since that's chemistry. The Urey-Miller experiment was to demonstrate the formation of key biological molecules in support for the Oparin-Haldane naturalistic origin of life from non-life, or abiotic evolution. The Urey-Miller experiment is great chemistry, but we now realize that it really does not have a whole lot to do with modern theory for a number of reasons. One is the original experiments used the wrong atmosphere. They used a highly reducing atmosphere, which would be very energetic and give them lots of products. Neutral atmosphere tends to inhibit the production of biological molecules. Oxygen, of course, stops pretty much altogether. Their experimental apparatus only allowed the creation of molecules and protected them from destruction. That would not be true in nature. And geology has not found any evidence of a primordial soup. That is, there are no carbon deposits that do, in ancient past that do not have a biological marker associated with them. But the thing that was amazing to me is, as a graduate level chemist, the Urey-Miller experiment was discussed very briefly, but never once did they talk about some of these newer aspects, or that that it no longer really reflects that the atmosphere used in it no longer reflects what we understand about the early atmosphere. And so, I think I agree with Jonathan Wells of calling this an icon of evolution. And it's just stressing, if this is happening in the highest levels of of academia among professional chemists, it's not surprising this happening elsewhere as well. Again, part of what I'm trying to note here is certain ideas are hindering discovery, discouraging investigation, and this problem is not restricted to just young high school students or grade students. I want to define two key terms before I close up here. One is what I've been referring to as methodological naturalism, or strong methodological naturalism, methodology where science enterprise is restricted to natural causes or natural explanations only. Weak methodological naturalism, by contrast, you start by looking for natural explanations, but you follow the evidence wherever it leads. Only weak methodological naturalism is consistent with modern science.
John, would you agree that the definition of science that's in the current standards and that's proposed by the majority effectively implements your strong methodological naturalism definition?
Yes, that is what I'm driving at.
And then also the definition of scientific knowledge, would you also agree that limiting scientific knowledge to simply describing the physical world in terms of matter, energy, and the forces essentially is the other buttress to the methodological naturalism in the standards?
Right, I agree. In both cases, they're effectively limiting science to only dealing with natural explanations. Again, if we look at the history and origin of science, that is not how science has developed. That is something that developed later, and it effectively constrains or limits the practice of science.
Thank you very much.
Because my time is limited, I'm going to ask you first a few questions,
Okay.
and I would like your succinct answer. In your opinion, how old is the Earth?
The Earth, I believe, is 4.6 billion years old. The universe is 13.7 plus or minus.
I didn't ask you about the universe.
Okay.
I asked you about the Earth.
All right.
Do you accept the principle of common descent that all life is biologically related back to the beginning of life? Yes or no?
I will say no because I don't think.
I didn't ask you for an explanation. Yes or no?
Okay, no.
No. Do you accept that human beings are related by common descent to pre-hominid ancestors? Yes or no?
No.
What is the alternative explanation that you propose then for human species?
Again, I'm a chemist, not a biologist.
I didn't ask you that. I asked you, what is your explanation if you do not believe in common descent from pre-hominid ancestors?
I do not believe the scientific evidence is sufficient to give an answer to that question.
You have no personal view about that?
I have personal views, but the question is, what does science say?
What is your personal view about that?
I do not believe that the scientific evidence is sufficient
I
to
didn't
rule out
didn't ask you scientifically. I'm asking you, what is your personal opinion about that issue?
Again, at this point, I do not believe in a natural explanation for the origin of humanity. I'm willing to change my mind if I find that evidence.
Did I hear you say that since Einstein, that science has in essence been restricted from progressing?
Not necessarily restricted, but it discouraged people from challenging the reigning paradigm.
Is it your understanding that there has been a conflict between special relativity and quantum mechanics?
There is.
And did you find any evidence to suppress the problems that special relativity and quantum mechanics possess for scientists, or have you found a strong and active debate in trying to find out how those two conflicting issues may be resolved?
In that particular issue, I do see a lot of working together. I don't see any hindrance.
And did you see how, in attempting to resolve that, theories such as string theory and superstring theories and all of the issues surrounding those particular theories have come about as a result of the vigorous and rigorous scientific process that occurs in this country and around the world on a daily basis?
And I support that, yes.
Do you further understand that issues such as dark energy and dark matter have come about since Einstein's early predictions?
I'm excited about that, yes.
And are you familiar with the issue of, with the hypothesis of dark energy?
Right.
Are you familiar with dark matter?
Again, I'm not an expert, but I am familiar with it, yes.
You are familiar, and you would agree with me that all of those scientific advances would not have occurred if what you say is true, that science today denies further knowledge.
I think you're misrepresenting my
Excuse
position.
me? Did you make a comment?
Me? No, I'm sorry.
You may answer.
Okay. All I was saying is, not in every case, but some cases, scientists will hold to philosophical positions and sometimes hinder research in those areas because either they're encouraged not to investigate certain things, or they simply are not interested in finding things that contradict their paradigm. That's not true in every single issue of science, but there are cases.
Your testimony is that scientists are purposefully withholding the ability of other scientists to come up with answers to questions facing humanity today?
I have not claimed that. I gave an example.
In your opinion, is evolution, as it is being taught in mainstream science courses across this country today, an atheistic philosophy?
Evolution is a very broad term.
Just answer my question, yes or no. Is science, in your opinion, as far as the teaching of evolution in mainstream America today, being taught in an atheistic fashion?
I think some people do teach it in that fashion, not all of them.
So you don't believe it is?
Again, there's different aspects to evolution. For example, I don't have trouble with the Earth being old. I don't have trouble with A appearing at a certain time and B and C. But I do have trouble when people assume that everything happens strictly by natural processes, even though they cannot verify that claim.
Do you believe the National Academy of Science stands for the proposition that we should make assumptions when it relates to, for example, the origins of species?
Again, I have no trouble with making assumptions as long as they stay assumptions. That's part of science, is you make hypotheses and you test them. I have trouble when...
And do you believe it is appropriate and important...
Would you allow the witness to finish his answer? You're interrupting the witness.
Right. Again, I believe in the scientific investigation. Everything should be put on the table. That's what I was trying to get. Go ahead.
Do you believe it is appropriate to bring into the scientific model supernatural opinions? Yes or no?
We should work from the evidence, so we should not work from either supernaturalist or strictly naturalistic explanation.
My question is, do you believe that it is appropriate in the scientific process to bring supernatural opinions?
Definitely
yes
not.
Or no?
Opinions, no.
Do you
Go ahead.
Do you believe science should be neutral as far as theistic issues?
I believe it should be neutral in all respects, neither favoring or disfavoring theism or atheism.
And you do not believe, correct, that mainstream science today, as it relates to the teaching of evolution, discriminates against any faith, do you?
It depends on how it's taught. It doesn't. Again, there are issues like something appearing at a certain time in the fossil record. That's an experimental evidence, and I have no trouble with that. But it can be taught in a way that does discriminate. But again, I'm not a teacher. I'm really not interested in getting to that issue.
Did you take the time to read the majority report?
I did not read it in entirety. I did read part of it.
Are you aware that in Kansas, teachers are encouraged to discuss a broad area of issues in evolution?
I'm not into teaching, so I'll accept that. I don't know.
Do you believe that our students in Kansas should be taught in science the best science available?
Right, they should be taught the best science available. Sure.
And do you further agree with me that it would be inappropriate to teach students as science mere opinions, suggestions, or assumptions?
Right.
No further questions.
Mr. Irrigamagory, you had 2 more minutes, I made a mistake.
I want to save every penny I can for Kansas children, and she's being paid by the word. I have nothing further.
We'll remember that one with the next long question.
Sir, you initially started talking about methodological naturalism. And the second draft does not mention methodological naturalism. It does talk, when it talks, I'm going to read part of it right here. It says, under the nature of science, as it is practiced in the late 20th and early 21st century, science is restricted to explaining only the natural world using only natural cause.
Right.
That's one sentence out of that paragraph.
Right.
Is that, how does that, is there any application? Is there, please comment.
Again, that first sentence, which restricts science to natural explanations, and the section pointed out by John Calvert, limit the expression of science. And I believe that that limitation is equivalent to methodological naturalism, hence my talk.
You're saying you believe that that is imbued in this definition?
Yes.
And then that went on with the rest of what you were discussing about three pillars of Kant and so forth.
Right.
Does methodological naturalism have any basis in inhibiting the either the research scientist or the scientist in the classroom, the teaching scientist?
I believe so. For example, I gave the Urey-Miller experiment where we were told just one side. And I only learned the other side through other sources and through personal investigation. But if we were taught the full story, that there are problems, that it doesn't answer many things, I think more science should be encouraged to investigate what is the answer there. I don't know what the answer is, but I think people would be encouraged, if they were allowed and even perhaps challenged, to, challenge some of the ideas that were presented.
If we had a more emphasis on empirical science, as defined by what is observable, measurable, testable, repeatable, and falsifiable, if that were done empirically.
Wait, could you repeat the question?
I haven't done it yet.
Oh, okay.
If I'm setting it up, if that empirical science were employed, would that alleviate a lot of the philosophical claims that are made in the name of science?
I believe so.
Would that also be of value for teachers to be able to move forward with the emphasis on empirical science?
Right. I believe that's correct.
I don't have any more questions, and I do thank you very much.
Audible hopes you have enjoyed this program.